Our next exercise is going to give us a good opportunity to learn a lot of new things about Excel. They're very simple things though, but they're things that you need to know how to do. What I want you to do is click on sheet number 2, and we're actually going to double click here, and let's call this multiplication table and hit enter. You can tell we can have pretty big names there. What we want to do is actually create a multiplication table because I want to talk about cell referencing. I mentioned earlier about absolute referencing and relative referencing. By default, Excel is always doing relative referencing. So when we use a cell reference like this, J5, that's a relative reference. Since we're in L5, this is basically saying go 2 columns over and on the same row 5. Okay? We're going to talk about an absolute reference because there will come a time in your Excel career when you need to use an absolute reference. And let's go ahead and start our multiplication table with the number 1, and then I will enter a number 2, and then we will go ahead and select both of those and fill all the way over to number, let's do 12, because isn't 12 what we usually have to go up to in school, right? Multiplication table. And we'll do a 1 here and a 2. And again, let's select both of them and go all the way to 12. Now, I want to make these rows a little bit taller so that they're a little more representative of what the columns are doing. So I'm going to select all of those. Actually, let's do it over here. We'll select the entire rows. And what you have to do when you do this is be very careful. If you have multiple rows selected, if you click and drag and resize one of them, they will all get adjusted to that same size. So you got to be kind of careful what you're doing or it'll bump things off the screen really quick and easy. And let's do right about a little bit more. Right about there. That looks fine. And what we want to do is fill in the missing values all the way over to 12 times 12. But I don't want to enter all that stuff in by hand. I want to have Excel do it for me, right? So let's start out and let's do it this way. We're going to do equals, and we'll just do it how we normally would. We want to take C5 and multiply it by B6. Sorry. C5 times B6, and that's it. It gives me 1. That's the right answer. Let's take that same formula and move it over here to the right and see if we get the right answer. 2. Okay, great. So let's keep going all the way over to 12. Uh-oh, big time problems. What's going on here? None of these values are right anymore. Let's take a look and see what's going on. In E6, it says E5 times D6. So that's E5, that's right, times D6. Oh, that's what's happening. So what happened there is that because we used a relative reference, it's just doing that relative relationship. In C6, we're talking about C5, that's right here, 1 cell directly up, and we're talking about B6, and that's right here, 1 cell to the left. So remember that pattern that is created there. 1 cell up, 1 cell to the left. So that same thing is being used over here. 1 cell up, which is 3, times 1 cell to the left, which right now is 2. And that's what's happening over here. 1 cell up, which is 6, times 1 cell to the left, which is 120. And that's why we get this funny result. Okay, so let's do Control-Z and undo all of that. Obviously, this formula is not going to work. It works here, and it happens to work in the next cell, but beyond that, it's not going to do it. So that means that our formula is wrong, because whenever we put a formula together and it's put together properly, it will work everywhere. So let's take a look at another way to do this, and we're going to do it with absolute referencing. Okay, let's talk about relative referencing. If I take this same formula, and I'll go ahead and right-click it and copy it, and I'll paste it. Let me go ahead and paste it over here. you can see that I get the same answer. I get a 1. Okay, because it's copying C5 to B6. So C5 times B6. That gives me not the result that I'm looking for because that's not 5 times 6. Okay. What I need to do is tell Excel that I always want to reference row 5 in my formula, at least for the first number, and then I always want to reference column B for my second number. And I do that with absolute referencing. So let's change this formula very, very simply. To tell Excel that you want a reference to be absolute, you put a $ in front of it. So this is actually saying that C is a relative reference, so it can change. 5, though, is an absolute reference, so it's always going to address row 5. And we're going to do the same thing in the second number, but this time we're going to make B, which is the column, we're going to make that absolute. So we put a $ in front of it. And again, this is saying the reference to B is absolute. I want it to be anchored here. I don't want that to change. But you can change the row. You can make the row relative. Let's hit enter. And let's see what this does first. And then we'll take a look at explaining why it works. We'll drag this over to N6. Okay, now that seems to be pretty good because now 8 times 1 equals 8. So at least at this point, it seems like it's working. Let's go ahead and I'm going to show you another time saver trick. We can select all of these cells and we'll simply drag all of those down to here and boom. Now, we know this is working. I'm going to explain why it is, but I want to point out first that by entering one formula, 2 simple click and drag movements have filled in this entire multiplication table. And I could have done one that's 100 times 100 and it wouldn't have been any more effort on my part, okay? Except I would have had to scroll off the screen a lot farther. But how did this work and why does it work? Let's just pick a random cell, okay? This is 8 times 5, which we know is 40. What's going on with the formula at this point? It says J $5 times $B10. Remember that we made the reference to the number or the row for the first reference, we made that absolute. And the column is relative. So what went on here? In the same column, we went up to row 5. So we're telling Excel, in whatever column I'm in, go up to row 5 and grab that number. Okay, that's C $5. Whatever column I'm in, go to row 5 and grab that number. And then whatever row I'm in, go over to column B. Whatever row I'm on, grab that number. That's what's happening here. Absolute reference to column B and a relative reference to row 6 because that's the row that I happen to be on at this point in time. Now, that's what works over here in J10. That formula said whatever column I'm in, jump up to row 5. So that formula got updated to J $5 because I'm in column J right now. So it jumps up to row 5, grabs the 8, and then it says now go over to column B and whatever row I happen to be on, which in this case is 10, okay, whatever row I happen to be on, jump over to column B, grab that number, and then multiply those two numbers. 8 times 5 equals 40. That same theory or principle or pattern, whatever you want to call it, that's what got duplicated and that's what got put into each one of these cells, and that's why every one of them gives us the exact correct answer. Again, one formula that we did, 2 simple clicks, and the whole thing was done. Now, if you don't even have a complete grasp of how to do that, that's not the most important thing here. Because really, you can re-watch this video and you can try it out for yourself, and eventually you'll get that. But the most important thing we want to get out of this is the immense amount of time saving that was accomplished by utilizing an absolute and relative reference together. Now, I want to say something very quickly here. If we reference, like if I do equals, let's just do $F $7, and I'll do times D5, okay, and hit enter. Now I get a value here. Notice this time that I put $2 in there. This is a complete absolute reference. That means no matter what, if I copy this formula anywhere, it is always going to reference F7 and grab that, whatever value happens to be there. Now, this reference is a relative reference. There are no $signs there. So that means that relationship, whatever the relationship of those two cells, that pattern is going to be copied wherever I go. So we're 3 cells down and 1 cell to the left. So if I take and I go and copy this to the right, let's just do a few of them. Let's analyze what's happening here. Remember, the pattern is always absolutely reference F7. Grab that 8. But then I have a relative reference that is 3 cells down and 1 cell to the left. So what's happening here? If I go here, notice how that relative reference is changing. Okay? It is always 3 cells down and 1 cell over, which in this case would be G5, and that's what shows up here. But that reference, the absolute reference to F7, that never changes because it's an absolute reference. Now, I hope you got something from that. I know it can be a little bit confusing, and for that reason, what we're going to look at next is kind of a rest on the brain, okay? We're just going to take this nice, pretty multiplication table that we've created, and we're going to format it to look a little bit nicer.